On the 6th of August 1945, a B-29 superfortress, the Enola Gay, dropped a new kind of bomb, an atom bomb, on the city of Hiroshima in Japan. It exploded with the force of 13,000 tons of TNT. The fireball melted metal and stone. The city was destroyed in an instant.
The man who gave the order to use this terrible new weapon was the American President, Harry Truman. Asked later, he said the decision to use the bomb wasn't difficult. I made the choice like that.
And within a week, the Japanese had surrendered. The war was over. The boys were coming home.
But was the decision to use the atom bomb really so black and white? Did Truman really just want to knock Japan out of the war, or did the Americans have more subtle reasons to display their newfound strength?
Like so many things in history,
it's a question of interpretation.
First, the background.
The background, at least, to Truman's version of the story.
It begins in the Pacific, with American troops on the offensive, pushing the Japanese back from island to island. But American losses were brutal. On Iwo Jima, they lost 4,000 men. On Okinawa, they lost over 12,000. By the summer of '45, only mainland Japan was left unconquered. But this would be the hardest fight of all. The worst estimates suggested the conquest of Japan would cost 1 million American lives. And many GIs who survived the war so far imagined in Japan their luck would run out.
But meanwhile, on a military base in New Mexico, work was underway on a new type of weapon, designed to release the energy locked up inside the atom. And by July 1945, the Manhattan Project was ready. On a test site 90 miles from Los Alamos, they exploded the first atom bomb. News of the successful bomb test was rushed to Truman, who at that moment was at Potsdam, just outside Berlin, in talks with his wartime allies, the Russians and the British. And Truman ordered the bomb be dropped on Japan.
A survivor, Kotoaka Osamu, recalled,
"The flash was indescribable. It was as if a monstrous piece of celluloid had flared up all at once. Even as my eyes were being pierced by the sharp red flash, the school building was already crumbling."
90,000 Japanese civilians died at Hiroshima. Another 50,000 died later of the lingering effects of radiation.
Truman's justification was that the bomb was the only alternative to a full-scale invasion. And so, in his words,
dropping the bomb stopped the war and saved millions of lives.
But was that the whole story? Because later, after the war, some of Truman's closest advisors began writing their memoirs. And in these memoirs, some recorded another version of the truth. That Japan was already just weeks from defeat, that Japan wanted to surrender even before Hiroshima. As Dwight Eisenhower, Commander-in-Chief of the Allied forces in Europe, put it,
"We didn't need to hit them with that awful thing."
These pictures aren't of Hiroshima. They show Tokyo, Osaka, Kobe, Nagoya, Japanese cities destroyed not by atom bombs, but by conventional explosives and incendiaries. The Allies had control of the sea. 9/10 of Japanese shipping was sunk or disabled. Her air force was crippled. Her factories wrecked. Her food supplies were shrinking fast. After the war, the official US Strategic Bombing Survey said,
By November 45, it's probable the Japanese would have surrendered, even if the atomic bombs had not been dropped, even if no invasion had been planned or contemplated.
and Truman knew it. So why drop the bomb?
This footage records events at Chergau in April 1945. A meeting between American GIs and troops of the Soviet Red Army, celebrating their joint defeat of Nazi Germany. But despite the smiles, there were tensions brewing within this wartime alliance. By the late spring of 1945, the Soviets had control of most of Eastern Europe, and it was clear they had no intention of withdrawing. Stalin, the Soviet dictator, talked of security, of using Eastern Europe as a buffer to protect the Soviet Union from attack. But the West feared he wanted more. As Truman put it after his first meeting with Stalin,
Force is the only thing the Russians understand. Stalin showed what he was after. The Russians are planning world conquest.
one war, the Second World War, was ending. Another, the Cold War between America and Russia, was about to begin.
The question is, in which war do you place Hiroshima? Because some historians argue this bomb drop didn't just end the war with Japan, it was the opening salvo of the Cold War, designed to intimidate the Russians as much as the Japanese.
Thus far, the Soviets weren't involved in the war in the Pacific. For Truman, that was good. It kept Stalin out of the post-war carve-up of Japan. But Stalin had promised, once Hitler was defeated, to send the Red Army east to help the Americans fight the Japanese. It was help Truman neither wanted nor needed.
The deadline was August the 15th. That was when the Soviet declaration of war was due. No time then to wait for Japan's slow collapse. Truman had to end the war before the Soviets got involved. And so, on August the 6th, just 9 days before the deadline, he used the bomb.
After the war, a US chaplain with the Pacific Fleet remembered the destruction of Hiroshima. He said,
That evening we were all very quiet as we gathered in the washroom for dinner. We knew that even before the bomb was dropped, the enemy had been defeated and seeking peace. There was an air of sadness at the thought of Hiroshima's needless destruction. Finally, one of our officers broke the silence. Why? Was all he said.
Why? It's a question of interpretation.